Welcome back. I am so excited for today's episode. We're going to dig into hormonal disruption and how there's so many other layers that we can dig into to help understand the full picture. For years, I struggled with hormonal disruption. I had all of the symptoms from acne, not being able to sleep, weight fluctuation, and weight loss resistance. My hair was thinning and falling out, and I thought my body was broken. It just didn't know how to work quite right. There was something wrong with the way my body was functioning. So I kept looking for the perfect hormone protocol or the person with the answers that could tell me what was wrong with my body. There was the smoking gun or the missing piece of information that would give me what I needed to heal my body and for my body to work right again. But that wasn't the full story for me. There was a lot more to consider than just my hormones. And today I want to share with you what else was going on that I needed to learn to consider and navigate. Because if you're also stuck in this symptom chasing mode like I was, what I'm going to share today might change how you view your body. For years, I struggled with hormonal disruption. It kind of started when I was probably 14, and I started getting acne on my back, and I was embarrassed to wear a swimsuit for my eighth grade history trip. I remember we had to wear swimsuits, and I was terrified to wear mine in front of all of the other people because I had acne all over my back. And then eventually this turned into severe PMS symptoms and acne on my face. I would be doubled over in pain with period cramps that were unbearable. And then eventually I started getting a lot of gut disruption. My hair was thinning and falling out. When I was about 21, 22, I started struggling with a lot of weight loss resistance, and my weight was fluctuating a lot by like 30 pounds just within a couple of months. I had severe acne all around my mouth and on my jaw, and my back was really broke out. I couldn't sleep. Then I went through a phase where I could sleep at the drop of a hat. Just no matter where I was, I could fall asleep. I started to acquire a lot of food intolerances that started off with some nuts, and then it grew into gluten and dairy and corn and anything with sugar or any sort of processed foods. A lot of things like any sort of meat sticks that came in like casings would upset my stomach. Drinks would upset my stomach, like bubbly drinks. Anything with artificial sweeteners, even if they were cleaner ones like stevia and monk fruit, that would hurt my stomach. Just felt like the list of things that I couldn't tolerate was growing and growing and growing. I felt extremely puffy and inflamed. I look back at photos and my face was so puffy and round, and my whole body just felt really puffy. And I didn't know at the time. I felt like it was hormonal disruption, or I thought that was probably it, but I didn't know that there were so many other things to consider when you're struggling with symptoms of hormonal disruption. I genuinely believed that my hormones were just wrecked and my body was working against me, and I had no idea why. And if I could just get my body to listen and force it to listen and figure out why it was broken and wasn't working like everybody else's was, then I would finally feel better. So I started out going to a dermatologist years ago and tried all sorts of acne medications. I went on birth control, I think when I was 15 years old, to help with acne and PMS. So I went the traditional route there, like a lot of other women do, or a lot of other young girls do. And then when I really started to struggle with weight, I started counting macros and counting calories and really restricting that and exercising more. And then I started seeing a doctor and doing some blood work, and my hormones were all normal, but I felt absolutely horrible, and I knew that something was going on. I did food sensitivity testing, and that lit up like a Christmas tree. And at the time, the doctor I was working with just told me I needed to avoid all of those foods. And I mean, there were things on there like blueberries, things that people are not intolerant to. At least it's not very common that you're intolerant to it, but it lit up like a Christmas tree. I was then diagnosed an antidepressant and told that I basically had IBS and depression or anxiety. And from there, I kind of refused to take this as an answer. And that was when something just flipped for me, and I decided that I needed to advocate for myself, and I needed to get really curious or start seeking out different opinions and different perspectives, because I didn't want to start taking medication and just adopt this diagnosis Not that there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes that's the path, that's the right path for those people. But for me, I didn't feel like this was it for me. I felt like there was something else going on. So I then started to go a lot deeper and try to understand different perspectives. And at that point, I was still looking for someone who had the answer, someone who could reveal what was wrong with my body, which later I learned that was a story I really had to flip. But at the time, I was doing a lot of alternative hormone testing. So Dutch testing for me was really helpful, looking at the way our hormones are metabolized. I also did gut microbiome testing, which was so impactful for me. At the time, I was struggling with some bacteria imbalance and had some candida overgrowth that really needed to be addressed. And when I started doing those things and taking a little bit different approach, things really started to change for me. So there was the hormonal layer and there was the gut microbiome layer. And then at some point, I kept having these symptoms that would reoccur. So I would resolve acne and bumps on my face, and then it would come back and my weight would kind of bump back up. And I had a few cycles of that, which really got me thinking, okay, what else is going on here? Because this stuff was so helpful and this works. When I did any sort of gut rebalancing protocols and a supplement approach to helping rebalance my hormones, that really helped me out a lot. But I was so curious why symptoms kept resurfacing every year or so. It was a very interesting cycle. And as I got really curious about that, I started to learn more about our nervous system and how the person that we are being is impacting the resiliency of our nervous system. The person that we are being is moving our body into fight or flight. And when our body moves into fight or flight, our body starts to shut down things that it doesn't think are necessary for survival, to summarize it really high level. And at that point in time, I really started to get curious about how I was showing up. My lack of boundaries, people pleasing, denying any sort of desires that I had, constantly self-sabotaging and self-abandoning, all of these things that were making me like perpetuating anxiety, which then seemed to really be driving some gut problems and hormone problems for me. That was kind of how things manifested for me. And it's different for everyone. I think that's the value of working with a practitioner that looks at your whole life and values deep health. And what I mean by deep health is health and happiness and vibrancy in all areas of your life, in your life as a whole, because it all works together so much. The imbalances that I was seeing on lab results, on hormone tests, on gut microbiome testing, on food intolerance testing, they were all very real, right? The data was real, but it wasn't the whole story. There was a lot more going on if we continue to peel back the layers of the onion. A term people use is really trying to understand the root cause. And some people stop at lab work there, but there was a lot more going on, much deeper than that was driving those imbalances in the first place. So the imbalances were real, but there was a lot more that was a lot deeper that really needed to be looked into. There were a lot of things that actually helped for me, but I want to note none of this was magic. It didn't all just click. It was really peeling back the layers of the onion to understand all of these things that contribute to deep health and where I was nourished and where I was depleted that was contributing to my overall health. And as I started peeling back the layers, there were several things that really made a big difference for me. But again, everybody's body's different. For me, things that were really helpful were hormone support. So I didn't do any sort of hormone replacement therapy, but I did do targeted hormone support using lifestyle changes and supplementation based on my personal lab results. So deficiencies that I saw on my own labs. I did some gut microbiome rebalancing. At some point, this looked like using pharmaceuticals, and that later transitioned into doing protocols through different companies that are more like herbs and supplements catered to rebalancing your gut microbiome. One other thing that really made a huge difference for me was learning about metabolic health and what drives metabolic health. Specifically, blood sugar regulation was a huge needle mover for me. So learning, what does that even mean? What is blood sugar regulation? What did it feel like in my body? For me at the time, I couldn't go 2 hours without eating. And I wasn't just hungry. I would get so hangry and shaky. I couldn't focus. I needed food right now. And so learning how to support blood sugar and have more stable blood sugar. So it's meant to go up and down, but how do I not have these big peaks and troughs and just drops that leave me feeling really cruddy? That made such a big difference in my body, which impacted my gut health and my hormones and the way that I was feeling in my body. So those were some physical things that helped. But some of the biggest things that I started to learn was the person I was being was probably making a bigger difference than all of the supplements, all of the protocols, all of the targeted exercise protocols, all of the blood sugar work. The person I was being was driving a lot of this dysregulation and imbalance more than any of that probably was. It all mattered, but as I was peeling back more layers, that's what was driving that imbalance in the first place. So when I talk about peeling back more layers, we started to look at chronic stress. What was contributing to my total stress load, and how could I offload some of that? And there are circumstances in life where we're navigating stress. Your body is resilient and it knows how to navigate stress. Stress is a good thing. But when you're never able to pull back, you're never able to move your body into rest and digest, that's where it becomes a problem. And for me, there was a lot of real stress, but then there was a lot of imagined stress. So I was constantly just revved up and worked up about everything. There was a lot of layers of understanding the way that I was just functioning and moving through the world. A lot of people pleasing. I had a lot of perfectionist tendencies. So everything needed to be an A+ job. There was no room for B- work. Other contributing factors were relationships in my life with dynamics that were not helpful or healthy anymore. There was a lot of overstimulation, so just constantly taking information in, and a lot of that was contributing to nervous system dysregulation. So a lot of it was not being able to, I didn't have a very, resilient nervous system at the time. I wasn't moving back and forth or oscillating between rest and digest and fight or flight, which is what your nervous system is meant to do. I was very much stuck in this fight or flight state all the time. And so I had to learn about nervous system regulation, resiliency, capacity, and how to improve all of those things and work with my nervous system and learn to honor it. Another layer that I really had to learn about was not just living out of alignment, but when I was in alignment, actually taking the action and following through with what was important to me, what were priorities, and not self-sabotaging and self-abandoning. And then there was this whole layer that, if I'm being honest, I'm still very much working on, and that's allowing myself to live this vibrant, alive life that I really want, and not denying parts of myself that want to come through. And that just looks like living fully expressed. I talk a lot about that in my coaching with clients. Just what does that look like for you? And learning how to start embodying that version of yourself and stepping into that version of yourself. Now, all of these layers that I've talked about, I've learned were really contributing to that higher level hormonal disruption. So there was all of this dysregulation and the person that I was being and lifestyle things that were really contributing to just dysregulation in my body that was manifesting as symptoms on my skin, in my hair, just hormonal disruption and gut dysbiosis. Now, of course, there were all of these lifestyle things like how was I sleeping? How was I moving my body? How was I fueling my body? There was all that layer of things that I would say was kind of in between or kind of weaved in all of that. But as you can see, there's just a lot of layers, and that's not to overcomplicate it. It can be made very simple, but I think when we start to understand all of these layers, we start to recognize again that our body is brilliant and is totally capable of healing. It has everything that it needs inside of it to heal. We just need to kind of take off the armor, start peeling back the layers of the onion, And that's what I mean when I say do the deeper work. Go beyond the lab testing and the data and start questioning. Oftentimes when we see hormonal disruption, it can be just that. But I think it's really important to remember that that is data. When we get lab results back, that is data that starts giving us some insight as to what might be going on inside of our body. And just like the hormone test, we can do gut microbiome testing, and that gives us some more information. Food intolerance testing, it's a different perspective, gives us maybe some more information, tells us to look a lot deeper. But again, it's all data, and we should be, from there, peeling back the layers of the onion to understand, okay, what drove us to this dysregulation or disruption in the first place? What is underneath the lab results that could be driving all of this? Yes, hormonal symptoms are real. Yes, imbalances deserve attention and we should do something about them. But often hormones are simply responding to the environment that they're in. When we are living a life where we are highly stressed with a lot of imagined stress, we're not sleeping well and taking care of our bodies for whatever reason. Maybe we're in a season of life where we just can't. If you're a new mom, there's a good chance that you would love to get more sleep, but the reality of it is you just can't right now. Maybe there's a lot of work that needs to be done around your metabolic health. For some people, emotional suppression or our emotional landscape contributes a lot to this dysregulated environment. For some people, there's a lot of boundary issues and self-sabotage, self-abandonment that contributes to this feeling of resentment and just feeling like things are bottled up. And that's getting stored in your body and creating this environment where dysregulated hormones start to show up. So a hormone test, a gut test gives data, but it does not tell us the whole story. There is a lot more to the picture that we need to consider. The hidden trap that I see a lot of women, myself included, get sucked into is outsourcing our healing. And what I mean by that is believing that some practitioner, some doctor can run a test and it will give you all of the information and finally tell you what's wrong with your body. Yes, testing is valuable and there is data that can be really insightful to give you some direction for how to better support your body. And sometimes when we can soften those symptoms, you really can feel better and start to work on these other areas of your life. So that's very real. But until you start doing that deeper work, you will more than likely find your way right back into symptoms. You can run the protocols, you can do more tests, you can add more supplements, you can work out differently. But until you start working on nervous system resiliency, the person that you're being, letting go of patterns that don't serve you, nourishing relationships, talking better to yourself, learning how to change subconscious beliefs and limiting beliefs, learning how to change your thoughts. That's what I mean when I say deeper work. Until we do that stuff, more than likely, you're going to keep finding yourself moving into this state of fight or flight and being stuck there constantly. And then from there, we just keep seeing these symptoms show up time and time again. So we can soften them and work on them with protocols and supplements and some very specific lifestyle changes, yes. But doing this deeper work moves the needle. So it's not about blaming the lab tests as being wrong, because they're not. It's really, really helpful data. But it can be really empowering to understand that when we can start leaning into these other things and peeling back more layers, we can take back a lot of the agency in our own healing and how we feel in our bodies and in our minds and showing up and how we're showing up in our lives. So while I think lab testing is really helpful, it does really help us understand imbalances in our body, deficiencies, toxicities, those sorts of things. And it can help us soften some of those symptoms pretty quickly. It is so empowering and so powerful to understand that there are layers much deeper than that we can really take ownership of, that will absolutely change our life, that will impact our hormones and our gut health very positively. And in fact, until we start working on those things, oftentimes we find ourselves with these resurfacing symptoms. So a really powerful approach is using the data for what it is, data, which helps give you some guidance, helps give you some things to add or remove right away. I love to use the stress bucket analogy to understand how total stress load starts to manifest as symptoms in our body. So if we think about a bucket that's filling with water, this is our stress bucket. And all sorts of things are filling up our stress bucket with water. Some of them are environmental toxins, hormonal disruption, gut dysbiosis, inflammatory foods, Maybe you're using a lot of toxic products. Maybe you've been exposed to mold, or you're living in a house with mold, so your bucket's really filling up. And then you start to consider things like people pleasing, negative self-talk, inability to set boundaries, overcommitment, burying yourself in work, poor sleep, abandoning yourself, self-sabotage, eating yourself alive in your own mind about your body, trying to fix your body because it's broken. All of these things are creating stress in your life and filling up your bucket. Now, stress is not necessarily bad. Our body is so brilliant and knows how to endure stress. That's how we grow. Leaning into stress and feeling overwhelmed is good. But when our stress bucket gets too full and starts to overflow, that's when symptoms start to show up for people. And the symptoms are different for everybody. This is kind of where genetics really come in, but symptoms can look like hormonal disruption, acne, hair thinning, acne on your back, weight loss resistance, weight gain. Sometimes it looks like gut problems, all of these sorts of things that start to show up for people, food intolerances. And sometimes the symptoms really start to stack because our bucket is just overflowing. We're not taking any water out, we're not making our bucket stronger, and we're not growing our bucket. So the water is just overflowing and showing up as symptoms in our body. So again, for one person, the symptoms might be anxiety, acne. Another person, it might be PMS. It might be digestive issues. And so the symptoms are just signals from our body that there's some imbalance. Our nervous system needs some support. Our stress bucket is overflowing, it's too full. And so when we can start to honor these things as signals and messengers, it really starts to reframe and shift how we're looking at the symptoms that we're experiencing inside our body. So lab tests are really useful. They give us a lot of data to help us understand what's going on internally, whether they're hormone tests, gut microbiome tests, food intolerance tests, whatever it might be. It's data that helps us understand imbalances in our body, deficiencies, toxicities, but they're only a piece of the picture. And when we start thinking about it that way, it really helps us take back a lot of agency and power in our own life. The point is that deep health is very layered and requires constantly revisiting your capacity, your resiliency, and your stress bucket. If you're feeling stuck in this symptom chasing mode, I invite you to pause for a moment, and instead of asking, how do I fix my hormones? Perhaps you ask, what environment am I creating for my body? If this resonates for you, I have a lot of upcoming masterclasses where we talk about different areas of deep health and what might be worth exploring for you. So much of this work is learning how to understand our body and lean into the work that we're presented in this life rather than fighting it and resenting it. If you're interested in the masterclasses, I invite you to follow me on Instagram and hop on my newsletter. That's where I'll be sending out some announcements as these masterclasses come up.